When I was about 12, my mom had just started letting me stay home by myself. We lived in a quiet, safe little town, peaceful streets, friendly neighbors, and a small downtown full of cozy restaurants and shops. It was the kind of place where you never felt the need to look over your shoulder, even at night. That sense of safety is exactly why my parents felt comfortable leaving me home alone for the first time. Even now, we still live in the same house. On that particular weekend, my parents had plans to go out and decided I was old enough to handle the house alone. Usually, when my sister and I were younger, my grandparents would babysit us. But since my sister wasn't home that night and I'd proven to be pretty responsible, my parents decided I'd be fine. They were still fairly young and liked to go out with friends, so leaving me alone for one night didn't seem like a big deal. They left me money for dinner, enough to order a pizza, and honestly, for a 12-year-old, that was a dream night. The whole house to myself, video games, and pizza. At the time, I was obsessed with James Bond games on the PS2. I was playing Nightfire for the third time, totally absorbed, until I finished and decided it was time to order my pizza. There was a pizza place just a few blocks away called Johnny's, one of our family favorites. I ordered a regular pie, planning to eat half and save the rest. My mom told me to wrap any leftovers in foil and put them in the fridge. I switched games to Agent Under Fire while waiting. When the doorbell rang, I grabbed the $20 bill my parents had left and ran downstairs. My mom told me to give the driver a $4 tip. Since the place was nearby, that seemed fair. The delivery guy looked to be in his 30s, rough-looking, with a long, scraggly beard and glasses under a black trucker hat. After I paid and waited for change, he glanced past me into the house and asked, "You alone here?" It instantly felt wrong. My parents had drilled into me not to talk about being home alone. I nervously said, "My parents are on their way home," hoping it would throw him off. In hindsight, I should have just said, "No." He probably guessed the truth anyway. There were no cars in the driveway and no adults answering the door. He gave me my change and I shut the door fast. I ate 3 slices, wrapped up the rest, and went back upstairs to keep playing my game. A few hours passed. It was around 11 p.m. when I heard the doorbell ring again. Assuming it was my parents, I called out, "Mom? Dad?" But instead of a familiar voice, I heard a strange man say, "Hey, I need help." He claimed he needed to use a phone. My stomach dropped. I asked, "Who is this?" But he just repeated that he needed to use the phone. I was too scared to look through the window, so I decided to go upstairs and ignore him. But as I started up the stairs, which faced the front door, the man banged on it and shouted, "Wait, please, I need help." That's when I realized he could see me through the small window at the top of the door. I turned and saw the outline of a man's head, dark and still, just watching me. My heart started racing. I bolted upstairs to my parents' room, the only place with a phone. I called my mom immediately. When she picked up, her tone changed the moment she heard what I said, that someone was at the door asking to come in. She asked if I'd spoken to him or let him know I was alone. I admitted that he'd probably seen me. She asked if anyone might know I was home by myself. The second she said it, I thought of the pizza guy. I told her that he had asked earlier if I was alone. While I was on the phone, the doorbell rang again, multiple times. I started panicking, telling my mom he wouldn't go away. She told me to lock myself in their room, keep quiet, and stay on the line while she called the police from my dad's phone. Then things got worse. Through my parents' open bedroom window, I heard the gate outside quietly creak open, the one leading to our backyard. My mom told me to stay absolutely silent and still. I whispered, "What if he tries to get in through the den window?" She told me again, "Stop talking and wait for the police." I tried to calm down, but then I heard footsteps downstairs. Someone was inside the house. I whispered that to my mom, and she started yelling to the police that the man had broken in. She told me to hide under the bed and not move. The footsteps came up the stairs, slow, heavy, moving between my sisters and my room. Then they came toward my parents' door. The handle rattled, locked. He tried again. Then light knocking, silence, then more rattling, and finally, footsteps walking away, back down the hall. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. My mom whispered that police were minutes away. Eventually, I heard heavy footsteps again, multiple this time, and a man calling my name, identifying himself as a police officer. I unlocked the door and 2 officers came in, with 2 more downstairs. They didn't need to break down the door. The back door was wide open. The sliding window was also open, showing how he'd gotten in. The police took my statement while my parents rushed home. When they arrived, only 2 officers were still there. I told them everything, including the pizza delivery man. The next night, my parents took me to Jenny's to identify him. I didn't see him there, but the manager said the description matched an employee named Phil, who was out on delivery. When they explained everything, the manager got defensive, saying it couldn't be Phil and asked us to leave. My parents caused a scene and said they'd never come back. They waited outside for nearly an hour hoping to see the guy, but he never showed. They suspected the manager might have warned him. Lawyers later said there wasn't enough evidence to take the case. We never went back to that pizzeria, and my parents were terrified to leave me home alone for a long time afterward. This next event happened about 2 years later, when I was 14 and in middle school. By that point, my parents were a little more comfortable letting me stay home alone again. I was older, more aware, and they didn't want me growing up afraid. Our house backed onto a small patch of woods. It wasn't huge, maybe 5 acres, but it was thick enough to be quiet and dark at night. You could walk about 10 minutes through it to reach another neighborhood on the other side. My friends and I sometimes cut through it during the day as a shortcut to the basketball courts. It was early autumn. I remember because the air was cool but not cold, and the leaves were starting to change. My parents had gone to visit some family friends that evening. I didn't want to go, so they let me stay home. It was still light out when they left, but I knew it would be dark before they got back. Around 8 p.m., I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I heard something outside. It wasn't loud, just a subtle crack, like a branch snapping. At first, I assumed it was an animal, but then I heard it again, closer this time. Our back porch light had burned out a few days earlier, so when I looked out the sliding glass door, I couldn't see much beyond the reflection of the living room. I turned off the TV and the lights, trying to see better. For a second, everything was quiet, just darkness and the faint shimmer of moonlight over the trees. Then, faintly, I saw movement. Someone or something stepped out from behind a tree. It was a man. He was standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible, but close enough that I could make out the shape of his body. I thought maybe it was a neighbor, but he wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the house. I froze. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call my dad, but before I could, the man moved. Slowly, he took a few steps toward the yard. The moonlight hit his face for just a second, pale skin, unshaven beard, hollow eyes, and in his right hand, glinting faintly, was something metallic. A knife. Panic set in instantly. I backed away from the glass door as quietly as I could. I didn't want him to see me. I ran upstairs to my parents' room again, the same room where I had hidden 2 years earlier. From the upstairs window, I could still see the backyard. The man was closer now, about halfway between the woods and the house. He moved strangely, like he was limping or dragging one leg. I couldn't hear anything, just the soft rustle of leaves. I called my mom right away. She picked up, and I whispered that there was someone in the backyard holding a knife. Her voice went sharp immediately. She told me to stay upstairs, keep quiet, and lock myself in. While we were talking, I looked back toward the window, and the man was gone. That terrified me even more. I ducked down below the windowsill, whispering to my mom that I couldn't see him anymore. She said the police were on their way and told me not to move. Then, from downstairs, I heard the faintest creak, the sound of the back door sliding open. My chest tightened. I hadn't even realized it was unlocked. I heard slow, deliberate footsteps on the tile. He was inside. I told my mom in a whisper, and she started yelling for me to get into the closet and stay hidden. I crawled inside the closet, shut the door just enough to see through the crack, and tried to control my breathing. The footsteps moved from the kitchen to the hallway, then toward the stairs. Each creak of a step made my whole body tense. I could hear him breathing faintly, slow, raspy, uneven. Halfway up, I heard another sound, faint but clear. Sirens in the distance. He must have heard them too, because the footsteps suddenly stopped. Then, quick and heavy, they went back down the stairs. I heard the door slide again, then slam shut. When the police arrived, they found muddy footprints leading from the woods to the porch and back again. They searched the entire area with flashlights but didn't find anyone. The only clear detail they got from the prince was that he had been wearing heavy work boots. My parents came home shaken, and this time my dad decided to install security cameras around the house, plus motion lights in the yard. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep without the hallway light on. The police never identified who the man was, but one officer said something that stuck with me, that sometimes people like to hide out in the woods and watch houses, waiting for a moment when someone's alone. By the time I turned 16, things had finally started to feel normal again. My parents still double-checked the locks every night, but I was older, more confident, and those childhood terrors had begun to fade into uneasy memories. It was early summer, and my best friend Tyler invited me to spend a weekend at his family's cabin. It was about an hour outside town, deep in the woods near a small lake. Tyler's parents were coming too, but they planned to stay at a nearby lodge, leaving the cabin to us and two other friends, Jake and Ryan. It was supposed to be a fun, guys-only trip, fishing, games, late-night snacks, and no adults hovering over us. We left on a Friday afternoon, the sky clear and the air hot enough to roll the windows down. The drive out there was long but peaceful, green hills, winding roads, and stretches of dense forest. By the time we arrived, the sun was dipping behind the trees. The cabin was beautiful, a 2-story wooden house with a wraparound porch, tall pines surrounding it, and the lake shimmering just through the trees. The first night was perfect. We grilled burgers, played cards, and told dumb ghost stories. Around midnight, Tyler's parents came by just to check in, then left again for their lodge down the road. Once their headlights disappeared, we felt truly alone, just 4 friends in the endless woods. After a while, Ryan dared us to take a walk down to the lake in the dark. It was only about a 5-minute walk, and we were feeling bold, so we grabbed a flashlight and went. The air was cool and heavy with that damp forest smell. The beam from the flashlight flickered over the trees, catching glimpses of moths and branches. When we reached the lake, the surface was still like black glass reflecting the moon. We stood there quietly for a while, just talking and skipping stones. Then, somewhere behind us, a twig snapped. We turned around, shining the flashlight toward the woods. Nothing. Ryan laughed nervously, saying it was probably a raccoon. We shrugged it off, but a few minutes later, another sound came, this time closer, like slow footsteps crunching leaves. Tyler called out, "Hello?" No answer. We started walking back toward the cabin, trying to act casual, but everyone felt the tension. Halfway up the path, Jake suddenly said, "Stop." He pointed to the ground. In the dirt, faintly visible under the moonlight, were footprints. Big ones, fresh. And they weren't ours. They came from the opposite direction, leading toward the lake. A chill went through me immediately. We picked up the pace, trying not to run but moving fast enough that we were nearly jogging by the time we reached the cabin. Once inside, we locked the doors and laughed it off, but it was nervous laughter. Tyler tried to brush it aside, saying maybe a hiker had wandered nearby. Still, Jake made sure every window was latched. We ended up staying up late watching movies. Around 2 a.m., I went to the kitchen to grab water. The cabin had a big window that faced the woods, and while I was filling my glass, I looked outside and froze. Someone was standing there. Not right up against the glass, but maybe 20 feet back, barely visible between the trees. A tall man in dark clothes, just standing, watching. My body locked up. I slowly backed away, whispering, "Guys, someone's out there." They came over, but by the time Tyler shined his flashlight through the window, the figure was gone. We searched outside for a few minutes but didn't find anyone. Still, none of us could sleep after that. The next morning, we found something that made it much worse. Muddy boot prints on the porch. They stopped right at the door. Same heavy tread marks as before. Tyler's dad came by later, and we told him everything. He said it was probably a hunter passing through, but when he checked around the cabin, he found a half-eaten sandwich wrapper and a torn piece of flannel cloth near the tree line, like someone had been camping nearby. That day, we stayed close to the cabin, playing cards and fishing only near the dock. By nightfall, everyone was on edge again. We agreed to leave early the next morning instead of staying a second night. That night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. My stomach dropped. I shook Tyler awake, and we both froze, listening. The steps stopped right outside the door, then came a soft, dragging scrape like metal against wood. The knife. Without saying a word, Tyler grabbed his phone and called his dad. The connection was terrible, but his dad told us to stay put and that he was coming right over. We heard one more faint step, then silence. A few minutes later, car headlights flashed through the window. His dad had arrived. The porch was empty when he came in, but the dirt showed fresh footprints again, leading away into the woods. We left as soon as it was light out. Later, the police checked the area but didn't find anyone. They said maybe it was a drifter or squatter living near the lake. But when I heard that, all I could think about was the man with the knife from 2 years before, and the pizza guy from the first incident. Different towns, different years, but the same heavy boots, the same silence in the dark. It made me wonder if he'd ever really stopped watching. Years passed. By the time I turned 21, those old experiences had faded into the background, filed away in the part of my memory reserved for things you'd rather not think about. I was in college, living in the city, far from the woods and that house. Life had become ordinary again. Every once in a while, I'd still get flashes of those nights. The man's silhouette at the window, the slow footsteps on the stairs, but I'd learned to tell myself they were random incidents, unconnected, just bad luck. Then, during winter break, I went back home to visit my parents. The neighborhood hadn't changed much. The woods behind our house had thinned out a bit from years of construction nearby, but it still carried that same heavy silence at night. It was the second night of my visit when it happened again. My parents were asleep, and I was in the living room scrolling on my phone when I heard a faint knock. Not the doorbell, just 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the back door. For a moment, I froze. Old instincts kicked in. I turned off the lights and peered toward the kitchen, where the sliding glass door faced the yard. The motion light outside flicked on, and through the fogged glass, I saw the faint outline of a man. He was just standing there, motionless. At first, I thought it was a neighbor or someone lost, but the longer I stared, the clearer the feeling became. This was the same presence, the same silence, the same shape I'd seen as a kid. I went upstairs and woke my dad, whispering that someone was outside. He grabbed the flashlight and went down to check while I stayed by the window, watching from above. He shone the beam out across the yard, but there was no one there. Just footprints in the frost, leading away toward the tree line. We called the police again, and when they came, I half expected them to shrug it off like before. But this time, something different happened. One of the officers took a look at the footprints and then froze. He turned to his partner and said, "These match the prints from a case upstate. Guy camping in restricted forest areas, breaking into cabins for food." When my dad asked for more details, the officer hesitated but finally told us the man they were looking for was in his late 40s, scruffy beard, rough build, and he was a former delivery driver. That word hit me like ice. I asked if they knew his name, and the officer said quietly, "We believe his name is Philip. He's been on the run for a few years." It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My dad and I looked at each other, both remembering that night, all those years ago, and the name Phil from Jenny's Pizza. The police searched the woods behind our house for nearly 2 hours but didn't find him. They told us later that they found a small campsite not far from the neighborhood, a tarp, a half-burned fire pit, and a tattered delivery bag. After that night, my parents sold the house within 6 months. They said it was time for a change. I've never gone back. Even now, years later, whenever I hear the sound of slow footsteps outside at night, or the faint creak of a door, I feel it all come rushing back. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, I still wonder if Phil is out there somewhere, wandering from town to town, still looking for houses where the lights are off and the kids are home alone. Chris tried to brush it off, saying maybe it was just a lost hunter wandering through the area. But deep down, I knew better. That man wasn't lost, he was watching us. We decided to block every possible way in. We pushed the couch against the big living room window and stacked furniture near the doors. None of us slept properly that night. We took turns staying awake, staring at the shadows moving outside, waiting for another sound. But nothing happened. The night dragged on in total silence. When daylight finally came, we went, half expecting to find nothing. But there they were, footprints. Bare, human footprints circling the entire cabin. They stopped at every single window, even the small one above the upstairs shower. It was horrifying. That should have been the moment we packed up and left. But we didn't. We were overconfident, stupid, trying to convince ourselves it was a one-time thing. That second night started just like the first drinks. Music, a small fire outside, but the mood was off. No one laughed much. Every so often, someone would glance nervously toward the tree line. Jess refused to drink that night. Chris kept his hunting knife clipped to his belt, and we all double-checked the locks before heading inside. By 3:30 a.m., the fire had burned out, and most of us were dozing off when Matt got up to grab a glass of water. Moments later, he stopped halfway down the hallway and whispered my name. When I looked, I saw him, the same man from the night before, standing in the kitchen. He was completely naked. His back was turned toward us, and it was covered in long, red scratches that looked raw and painful. He stood in front of the fridge, swaying slightly. almost like he didn't understand what it was. None of us made a sound. Matt just started backing up slowly. The rest of us gathered quietly at the hallway entrance, me clutching a pocket knife, Sarah holding a fire poker, and Chris gripping a broken chair leg he'd snapped earlier as a joke. Then someone flipped on the kitchen light. He was gone. The back door was open, wide open, but not broken. No damage, no signs of force. Just open, as if someone had unlocked it from the inside. That was it for all of us. Within 20 minutes, we had thrown our stuff together, just the essentials, phones, wallets, keys, and we were gone. We didn't talk. We didn't even look back. We just drove through the dark woods until we finally got a cell signal and called the sheriff. We met a deputy at a small diner off the highway. He didn't even look shocked when we told him what happened. His only question was whether anyone got hurt. Then he said flatly, "Yeah, we've had some issues with people squatting up in those woods. Not always right in the head." We tried to explain that this wasn't some random drifter. This man watched us, returned twice, and somehow had a way inside. But the deputy just nodded like it wasn't the first time he'd heard something like that. When we mentioned the cabin owner, the deputy's expression changed slightly, like he recognized the name but didn't want to say more. A few days later, the cabin's listing vanished from every rental site. Completely gone. No contact, no refund, no explanation. We never found out who that man was or how he got in. None of us ever went back to South Carolina. But sometimes late at night, I still wake up with the image burned in my mind, his pale face, pressed against the glass, staring. And in that split second before I fall back asleep, I can almost hear it again, that slow, steady tapping on the window.